turn them into roads.
Don't worry, said Sir Handel. Leave him to me. I'll send him packing.
Sir Handel is the Skarloey Railway's number 3 engine. He's a fictional narrow-gauge saddle tank locomotive, created by the Reverend W. Awdry. And like most characters made by the Reverend, Sir Handel has quite a bit to him, not just in the history of his models, but also in the terms of his basis and inspiration. As such, today we'll not only be focusing on Sir Handel's models, but the history of him as well, and what exactly inspired one of my favorite narrow-gauge characters. So let's start at the beginning. Sir Handel was originally known as Falcon, and worked on the Mid Sodor Railway. Most notably, he would run this railway with Duke and Stewart, who later would be known as Peter Sam. And once the Mid Sodor Railway was closed, he and Stewart both would be sent off to the aluminum works, where there he would work until he was brought onto the Skarloey Railway. Sir Handel was not the most well-behaved when he first came to the Skarloey Railway. Not only would he call the coaches cattle trucks, but he would also derail himself on purpose when his driver planned for him to fetch trucks. He would be disciplined by the thin controller by being left in a shed until he was ready to behave. Unfortunately, the coaches still wouldn't trust him after such, and they would cause him to derail again after accusing him of bumping them, when in actuality he suddenly had to stop for a sheep on the line. He would also pretend to be ill to avoid going to the quarry, which was advised to him by Gordon, which only led to Peter Sam having an accident with the trucks after the trucks at the incline mistook him for Sir Handel.
Faster, they yelled. No, no, wailed the empty cars. It's Peter Sam. But it was no use.
He was also doing this to avoid the BBC television producers that were on the narrow gauge railway. But because of this, the thin controller would arrange for him to be taken apart for the producers to be shown how an engine works. So that didn't really work out for him. Sir Handel didn't cope well with the worn track on the railway, and often derailed, again, sometimes deliberately. So he was given a pair of special wheels with broad tires to cure his problem. These wheels were dubbed Steamroller Wheels by the other engines. Later on, Skarloey would have Sir Handel meet his match with a bad-tempered steamroller named George, as they hoped this would teach him some sense. This, however, instead resulted in him having an accident when George rammed his front roller into his train. Despite this, Sir Handel still took the belief that he sent George packing, but would stop talking about it after some children heard about the situation and would tease him about it. In 1982, Sir Handel would visit the Tallyclin Railway to help tide over a locomotive crisis. Sir Handel had plenty of adventures there as well, like pulling a wedding train, and having to wear an eye patch after colliding with a tree. He spent 2 years in Wales before returning to Sodor in 1984, where he would take his share of summer traffic. Becoming jealous of Peter Sam, Sir Handel would one day deliberately knock off his fire bars. Because of this, he was sent to the shed and began to fear that he would never come back out, as several weeks had went by and nobody had came to see him. When the thin controller came in one day, he asked for a second chance and got his fire bars later that day. And I think that covers enough of his history. Now, what's interesting is Sir Handel is based on the Tallyclin Railway's number 3 locomotive, Sir Hayden. The locomotive originally belonged to the Corus Railway, and several historical events that would happen with this locomotive were mirrored with Sir Handel. Sir Hayden, the real locomotive, is named after Sir Henry Hayden Jones, the former owner of the Tallyclin Railway. Sir Handel actually gets his name from the owner of the Skarloey Railway. Sir Handel's derailments in both the railway series and TV series are also inspired by Sir Hayden, who at a time was used very rarely, as the bad state of the track meant he would often derail, this being during the early days of the Tallyclin Railway. His punishment of being left in a shed for misbehaving comes originally from Sir Hayden's disuse due to his derailment problem. There would also be an incident in which Sir Hayden ran into a tree branch, and as such, the face he wore was given an eye patch and bandage. This also was turned into a story in the Railway series, where Sir Handel is shown wearing the same thing. In the 1980s, the Tallyclin would repaint Sir Hayden to represent Sir Handel. Christopher Awdry would write this into the 1985 book Great Little Engines, explaining that Sir Handel was visiting the line while Tallyclin was ill. You can probably see now how it all ties together. And now that we've established not only the history of Sir Handel, but his basis Sir Hayden, let's talk about the actual models of Sir Handel, starting with Awdry's model. The Reverend would build a model of Falcon in 009 for his Mid Sodor layout. Falcon was quite the kit bash, being made from a GEM Very kit, which was modified with a saddle tank, a cab from an Airfix Pug kit, and a Minitrix 060 chassis. Falcon's original model was donated by Awdry and put on display at the Reverend Teddy Boston's Cadeby Light Railway, this being before the railway closed in 2005. A friend of Awdry would also scratch build a model of Falcon as a gift. This model is now stored at the Narrow Gauge Railway Museum in Wales. Now let's talk about his television series models. The first being his O-gauge model, the small scale one. Sir Handel's small model was built from brass, this being done by model maker Peter Eves. He ran on O-gauge track to scale more properly to the Gauge 1 models, and was painted using glossy car body paint and lined with red pinstripe taping. His number and nameplates would be custom printed foil stickers. And for episodes taking place on the Mid Sodor Railway, Sir Handel's nameplates were covered with black tape and overlapped with his Falcon nameplate. A bit lazy, but it got the job done, I guess. Sir Handel used Manning Wardle wheels with thicker tires to achieve the steamroller look, and though these wheels were used on an O-gauge locomotive chassis, all of the narrow gauge steam engines had side rods that were sourced from OO scale trying models, and then modified slightly to fit. These rods notoriously didn't fit well, and as such the models ran pretty poorly behind the scenes. On Sir Handel, the rods from the Trying Princess were modified so the rods connected to the crosshead on the outside, rather than on the inside, with his buffers being sourced from Slater's plasticard. Sir Handel's small model would have 10 different facial expressions sculpted for it, though these would only appear in the 4th season. The faces, like most others, were sculpted in clay, and from that resin casts were made using a silicone mold. Currently, 5 of Sir Handel's faces are now owned by Twitter user Thomas Tankmerch. The model had a motor to power it inside of its chassis, as well as an eye mechanism. There wasn't enough room to fit a smoke mechanism, however, or the battery and receiver needed for his RCIs. The wires connecting to the battery, servo, and receiver were usually hidden off camera or carried in behind the engine. Sir Handel also had a blacked out cab, which meant all of his drivers and firemen had to be cut down the middle and black tacked to him. It's also worth noting that in various promotional material, as well as in nameboard title sequences, he and Rheneas have incorrectly worn each other's faces. This error has also transitioned onto Rheneas' wooden railway model and take-along toys. Sir Handel's faces have also been worn by Peter, Sam, and Duke. The small-scale Sir Handel was only used in the 4th season. Prior to 2004, the whistle broke off, and this error would transition onto his large-scale model. As of 2018, Sir Handel's small-scale model, along with his happy, content, annoyed, snarling, and neutral faces, and his nameboard, are now owned and preserved by Twitter user Thomas Tankmerch. Now let's talk about his O-gauge large-scale model. Sir Handel's large-scale model wasn't built until 2005 for financial reasons, and this model of Sir Handel was used exclusively between the 10th and 12th seasons. The model itself was built to a larger scale than the original Gauge 1 engines, and ran on O-gauge track. They were closer to 16mm scale, but just slightly larger. This model of Sir Handel would have 7 different facial expressions, but only 5 of such would ever be used on screen, the 2 never being shown being 2 unused clinched faces. These faces were made just like the previous. They were first sculpted in clay, and from that resin casts were made of a silicone mold. The model itself was made from brass, with the wheels and chassis being CNC, that meaning custom machined. The model itself was track powered, so pickup contacts were attached to the metal wheels, and this model, due to its larger size, was actually fitted with a smoke unit. Before Sir Handel's return in Season 10, the large-scale model's body was used in the 9th season for the character Proteus. During this time, the chassis for Sir Handel wasn't built yet, so Proteus actually ran on Peter Sam's chassis. A cast of Sir Handel's model was later used for Proteus's statue seen in the 12th season episode Mountain Marvel. In the Season 12 episode, The Man in the Hills, Sir Handel is briefly seen with a lamp. This is powered by a hidden battery pack inside of his body shell. And during the model series, Sir Handel's large-scale model underwent many changes. Just to name a few, in Season 10 he slightly increased in size and received a darker blue livery, his eyebrow shape changed, his saddle tank became wider, then in Season 11, the sides of his cab openings were blacked out, and then in Season 12 opened up again. This poor guy has seen quite a bit. However, I am happy to announce that Sir Handel's large-scale model is now currently on display at the Hara Model Railway Museum, this being in Japan, and is currently wearing his happy face, which I would be too if I didn't end up at Drayton Manor. Sir Handel also had a close-up model built. This was built in the 4th season, and was required for scenes where he had to interact with the close-up scale figures. Smoke would emit from the whistle and firebox when required, and the cab itself was made in pieces, so it was easier to assemble and dismantle. And unlike both of his O-gauge models, Sir Handel's front and back cutout windows had glass. Sir Handel's close-up model would only appear in the 4th season, with his buffers being recycled for Duncan's model in Season 6. Now, as most of you all probably know, in 2009 the show would switch to CGI, as a replacement for the show's long-standing live-action models. Sir Handel, like the others, would be recreated from scratch in CGI by Nitrogen Studios, him specifically in 2010 for the production of the 2012 special Blue Mountain Mystery. This model would be made in Maya, a 3D animation and modeling software, and photographs of Sir Handel's large-scale model were used for referencing. In addition, Nitrogen Studios would also go to the Tallyclin Railway and take measurements of Sir Handel's bassist, Sir Hayden, so that his CGI model would resemble Sir Hayden as closely as possible. This unfortunately, however, would be the end of all of his models, or physical ones I should say. And though the history may unfortunately end there, hopefully you leave this video with either a little more knowledge on Sir Handel, or like me and with a little bit more appreciation for his character. Sir Handel may not be a real locomotive, but he's pretty close, and that was super cool to find out about. If you guys did enjoy, be sure to like and subscribe for even more train content, and thank you again to everyone who voted for Sir Handel to be this week's episode. I'm thinking I'm gonna keep the narrow gauge trend going for a little bit, so if there's any other Skarloey Railway characters you guys would like me to talk about, be sure to comment down below and I'll do my best to add them to the next poll. As always, thank you guys again for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.
You swank around with your steamroller wheels, pretending you're as good as me. Actually, I'm better. Goodbye.